I am honored to introduce our panelists. We've got a great panel for you here for EAs in media. First up is an actor. His acting career spans the last 3 decades and ranges from TV, where he was on Third Rock from the Sun, to art house productions, such as Mysterious Skin and Brick, to multiplex movies such as Inception, 500 Days of Summer, and Snowden. He made his feature screenwriting and directorial debut with Don John, which was nominated for Best First Screenplay at the Independent Spirit Awards. He also founded and directs Hit Record, an online community of over 500,000 artists emphasizing collaboration over self-promotion. Hit Record has evolved into a community-sourced production company, publishing books, putting out records, producing videos for brands from LG to the ACLU, and winning an Emmy for its variety show, Hit Record on TV. Please welcome again, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Next up is Julia Galef. Julia is a writer and speaker focused on improving human judgment, especially about high-stakes questions. She has a background in statistics and social science, worked as a case writer for Harvard Business School, and then as a freelance journalist in New York. She has been the host of the Rationally Speaking podcast since 2010, co-founded the Center for Applied Rationality in 2012, and is currently working for the Open Philanthropy Project on an investigation of expert disagreements. Please welcome Julia Galef. A.J. Jacobs is next. He is an author, journalist, and human guinea pig. He is the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers, including The Year of Living Biblically, The Know-It-All, and Drop Dead Healthy. He wrote a feature about effective altruism for Esquire magazine, where he is a contributing editor. The article followed his attempt to figure out where to donate his writer's fee. He is a contributor to NPR's Weekend Edition. He has given 3 TED Talks that have appeared on TED's main page and have more than 3 million total views. His book, The Year of Living Biblically, is being turned into a TV show by CBS and will air in the fall. His new book, It's All Relative, will be released in November, and it chronicles his attempt to unite the entire world in a single family tree. Please welcome A.J. Jacobs. And finally, to moderate this great panel, please welcome back Will MacAskill.
Cool. Okay, thank you all for coming to this panel. And a reminder that on the Bizzabo app, you can start submitting questions. We'll have a conversation for 20 or 25 minutes, but then afterwards, we're looking forward to seeing questions from all of you. So to begin with, let's just, if each of you, maybe AJ, Julia, and Joe, talk a little bit about your background and your current relationship to effective altruism.
Start?
Yeah, go for it.
Is this, I'm not sure it's on. Is it on? Not really?
Okay,
Yeah,
Joe, do you want to start and we'll
Check,
go the other
check.
way around?
Yes, mine's working.
Panel's just you now.
Yeah, awesome. So my name's Joe. I just sat and embarrassingly listened to my bio be read right in front of me. That is a poorly executed entrance. But I work in show business. And I first found out about EA because a friend invited my wife and I to the conference last year. And was really just completely taken with it. I hate to stereotype Hollywood, but I think it's pretty true that it's emotionally driven, and there's lots of good intentions, and lots of people that are trying to do good with whatever leverage Hollywood gives you. But oftentimes those attempts to do good are very, very emotionally motivated. What makes the best story, and coming and learning about these concepts of not following what makes the best story, but what can actually provably be shown to be doing the most good, I found incredibly compelling and novel, and worth talking about some more. So happy to be here.
Okay, AJ, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a writer and a journalist, and as Nathan said, a human guinea pig. So I like to take on a project and immerse myself in it for a year or two, and then write about it. For instance, I wrote a book about living by all the rules of the Bible, as literally as possible. So I had the 10 Commandments. I followed those. I had a beard down to here. I stoned adulterers, but I used pebbles so that I didn't get arrested. And I tithed, because they do say 10% in the Bible. I gave to orphans and widows, as the Bible instructed, which I don't know if GiveWell approves of, but seemed okay. And I got involved because I wrote an article for Esquire last year where I took my writer's fee, a couple $1,000s, and I wanted to figure out what I could do with that money to produce the most good in the world. And guess what I found is GiveWell. So I gave it to GiveWell and to Will and to Peter Singer. I sort of split it up a little. But I fell in love with the idea of effective altruism, and hopefully there were a couple of converts from the article, but maybe not.
Okay, thanks for that. And Julia, can you also talk a bit about your background and relationship to EA?
Sure, yeah. I originally thought I was going to go into academia, into social science research. And then I ended up deciding, I quit grad school. I'd been in an economics program, and I told my parents, I think what I really want to do with my life is just spend as much time as I can talking to really smart and thoughtful people about the most important issues. And my parents were like, do you get paid for that? And it's not. And the honest answer was, I have no idea. I'll find out. So I dropped out of grad school. I became a freelance journalist. I did a bunch of blogging. I started a podcast called Rationally Speaking. And I was sort of writing about and speaking about EA or EA adjacent things kind of before EA was a thing. Like, I don't know, I wrote a post about trying to estimate the number of lives per calorie for different animal products, and reach the sort of counterintuitive, or to many people counterintuitive conclusion that eggs are actually worse in terms of costing animal life than beef is. So I was publishing stuff like that for like the Scientific American's blog and talking about it on my podcast. And then about 5 years or so ago, I moved out here and co-founded a nonprofit called the Center for Applied Rationality, of which there are several representatives here leading sessions, so I encourage you to go to them. And then right now I'm doing a number of things. I'm still doing the podcast. I'm working on a book, won't be out for a while. And I'm also working with a foundation called the Open Philanthropy Project, where my role is basically hosting conversations, bringing together people from tech and finance and the media, along with EA and academia, and experts on really important questions like AI, potential risks from AI, or criminal justice reform, or land use reform, and sort of getting the experts to better understand each other's models and getting the people outside of that field in tech or the media or finance to really understand the experts' models and sort of have heard the best arguments on both sides of these important topics. So I'm basically doing what I set out to do, which to everyone's surprise, including my own.
Cool, thank you. And so, yeah, a lot of people in this audience are really interested in promoting the ideas of effective altruism more widely. And I know that each of you, in very different ways, have some interest in doing that, whether you're doing it now or potentially in the future. What do you think are some of the real challenges with respect to trying to communicate the core ideas of EA more widely? Joe, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think this might be obvious, but the truth is that, to me, it seems a lot of the principles of what EA is are very much at odds with how the media works. Because media, and that's especially television, but also newer media online is it's not a platform that's conducive to reasoned thinking and really analyzing something and picking it apart and understanding it. It's much more about creating, just getting attention, getting eyeballs, and making things addictive. And so I don't have a solution to this, but it may be worth at least identifying the problem. It seems to me that what I really like about EA is completely at cross purposes with everything I know about how the media works. So I don't know, I'd be interested to start brainstorming how do you then deal with that. You know, do you, I guess, come to conclusions through more reasoned thinking and then present those conclusions in the media unreasonably, more emotionally? I don't know. Is that sort of hypocritical? Is that going against the principles of EA? I do sort of think that if you really want to get any kind of message out in front of a wide audience and not just preach to the choir, but like get out there and into what you might call mainstream culture, you can't be too reasonable.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Okay, yeah.
And
Go on.
Will, you and I actually talked about this because I agree with Joe that the media does not represent reality. As you said, most news is fake news. So we had talked about this idea of the Reality Times, which would be a news site which accurately reflected reality. So every day the front page would be, instead of 2 people killed by a shark attack, it would be 2,500 people died of malaria yesterday, or 48,000 died of heart disease. And it doesn't all have to be bad news. So like when they had the London fire with 70 people dying, you could print an article that tens of thousands of lives have been saved over the last decades because home fires are way down. So it would be, and then you could put the shark attack on page, on like the 50th page. And so I would love to actually start that. I don't know if I have much time to do it, but if anyone wants to do it, I'm happy to pro bono be the advisor.
And the idea is as well that the front page basically wouldn't change day on day because
That's true. Yes, exactly.
the news is like, yep, again, 5,000 children died of malaria. Same as yesterday.
Yeah.
Like,
Down in the
whatever.
corner, on the bottom right corner, you could change every day. But yeah, the main one would be,
Yeah. The other thing that I love about
what's that?
Good business model.
Yeah,
exactly.
it's clickbait.
Well, the other thing I
Some
love
read
about
the-
this idea is representing it as like alien invaders have like tiny little helicopters flying into our homes and poisoning our children. What are we going to do about it? Thousands dead. And then it's revealed as this is
Mosquitoes.
malaria, mosquitoes.
Exactly.
Like how you would cover this if it was an alien invasion.
Right. Taking a slow crisis and
Yeah.
just turning it, and like get a reporter on the scene, like,
Yeah.
oh my God.
So there, the kind of solution is, okay, the normal media is completely at odds with EA. Maybe we just have to create our own. Julia, what are your thoughts on this?
I share Joe's pessimism.
Just go home.
I was just thinking, over. I was just thinking about this Saturday morning breakfast cereal comic about this problem in science journalism, where the first panel is a reporter talking to a scientist, and the scientist is like, we had really successful results in our early cancer trials. We were able to reduce the spread of this cancer by this % in this species. And then the next panel is the headline, "Scientists cure cancer." And then the panel after that is the scientist coming back to the reporter and saying, kind of annoyed now, no, we didn't cure cancer. We've moved faster towards a future solution to cancer. And then the next panel is another headline saying, "Scientists invent time travel." Sorry? Turn it louder? I don't know how to do that, so I'll just speak louder. It's a huge problem, and I think that one thing that EAs tend to, a common failure mode for EAs when talking about these topics is that, EAs tend to be really, really nerdy and intellectual, and we want to gravitate towards the most intellectually interesting things to talk about in interviews or in the material we put out there. And the problem is that what's intellectually interesting to you is sort of weird or confusing or alienating to most people. And so you kind of have to be willing to talk about the stuff that to you is super boring and trivial, and just
Or
you know,
obvious.
or obvious, exactly. And just trust that, like, maybe you can't even quite remember, but the first time you encountered the idea that, whoa, a lot of ways that people try to do good actually don't work. And there are other things that are sort of demonstrably 100 times more effective, and wouldn't it be better to do the effective things than the ineffective things? Like, maybe that sounds obvious if it's the background of your life for years, but people hearing it for the first time, that's a really cool insight that they haven't thought about before. But to you, it's boring. So you have to kind of be willing to bore yourself when talking to the media or putting stuff out there, and just remind yourself this, like, being intellectually interesting. Oh, and also being able to signal my capacity for nuance and sophistication, which I think a lot of us like to do in conversation, is that's not what this is for. This is for getting a message out there, which is hard.
Another thing I've found, which what you're saying reminds me of as far as boring yourself when talking to the media, I spend a fair amount of my life having to promote something that I've done and talking to media, and what you find is you have to be repetitive, and it's really boring for yourself because you're just saying the same thing over and over and over again, and the natural instinct is, of course, to say new things to all the different people, but that's really not as effective. Yeah. What's really the most effective thing is to find the two or three things, the 2 or 3 points that you want to make, and pretty much repeat those over and over and over and over and over again. And it's not as fun, but that's, if you want to communicate something out to a lot of people, that's kind of how you have to do it in my experience.
Yeah, and so something that's related to this question of challenges and it being opposed is, we talk about the media, but that's a variety of different things. So social media, Twitter and Facebook, podcasts, articles, books, movies, documentaries. Which of these do you think are kind of more amenable? You've got experience with all of them between the three of you. Which do you think are the most amenable for EA, and what things should we maybe stay away from? I made a joke in the Boston conference about, imagine if Sir Francis Bacon had been trying to promote the scientific method on Twitter, and then he just gets all of these messages calling him a cock in response. Probably wouldn't go down that well. I know that Julia's more pro-Twitter, but...
I'm very pro-Twitter,
yeah.
and there's a great, one of the things I love about Twitter is there's a whole community of social scientists and statisticians and scientists who have conversations on Twitter, and they're actually debating with each other about the right threshold for the p-value and discussing the results, latest scientific results. It's really cool. So yeah, I'm bullish on Twitter.
Okay, and what do you think, AJ and Joe, about other media as well?
Well, yeah, just because I think it's a fascinating topic as far as, how useful is Twitter, Twitter being an example, and Twitter being a good one because it's probably the most extreme example of having to be super short attention spanny. I use Twitter a lot, but I don't so much engage in conversations on Twitter. What I try to do is use Twitter to get people off of Twitter and onto a community that I started a sort of an artist community called Hit Record, and so Twitter's really effective at sort of attracting people who might be interested in what we're doing and bringing them over to us. So maybe that's a strategy to consider for EA, because I could see how trying to discuss the stuff that would get discussed on this stage would be really difficult in 140 character tweets. But a quick sort of hook to get them to come off of Twitter and enter into, I don't know, whatever other online activity you want them to engage in. That's maybe another way to use Twitter.
Yeah, and my feeling is use everything possible. Just don't discriminate. Just however to get your message out. But I think some forms of getting the message out are more effective. And for instance, stories. I actually think it's very unfortunate that humans love stories instead of statistics. It would be nice if we all found statistics as emotionally appealing, but we don't. So you and I talked about this before, really focusing in on one, doing a story where you follow someone who got $1,000 from Give Directly and how it changed their life. And you can put that out in whatever form you want, article, video, and then say, this happens millions of times a day. so donate to this cause, as opposed to just saying, there are 1 billion people who live in poverty, therefore you should donate. Just focusing in on the one person.
Stories are good. I think another thing you can do, even on Twitter or social media, where people are not going to read a long, nuanced article, is create images that people will share and that convey a message really well. So one person on Twitter who I think does this excellently, and his message is actually pretty aligned with EA, is Max Roser, who does Our World in Data. And he shares these charts and graphs showing how dramatically the rate of people living in extreme poverty has declined over the years, or showing how infant mortality has gone down, or showing a map of the world and the incidence of malaria in 1990 versus today. And they're just very compelling, and they tell a story in an instant. And they don't go as viral as Trump memes, but among sort of thoughtful, intellectually curious people, I think they're shared a lot.
And so one question from the audience, which I think is good, just right on this topic, is what about the idea of an EA comedy show, like a sketch show? Because I actually think there's so many good examples of EA thinking through comedy, because it has that tension between there's this argument there, but it's also transgressing a taboo often. So
It's transgressing into what?
transgressing some taboo often. One example on this is David Mitchell, a British comedian, had a sketch called Not Enough Drownings, which was about how in this very large area of the UK, no one drowned. And he was saying that's very bad allocation of resources. If we're pouring so much resources into, getting one drowning down to 0, then think of what that money could have done.
I thought it was Umishism, if people never drown in pools, then you're not swimming enough.
Okay, yeah, but kind of the similar, actually kind of similar idea. I mean, do you think there's actually potential there?
It depends on who you want to watch it. I mean, and that's actually, I think, in all seriousness, an important thing to think about anytime you're talking about communicating on media. Because on the one hand, preaching to the choir is thought of as not a good thing to do. But on the other hand, I mean, you were just talking, Will, in your opening talk about, the strength of a community, and a community's continual bond often comes from that kind of preaching to the choir of let's have a, whatever it is, a weekly comedy show where we all get to laugh together about the things that we agree about. I don't think that's necessarily bad. You're probably not gonna, I would guess you're not going to reach across the aisle, so to speak, and pull people who wouldn't otherwise agree with you to laugh at those kinds of things. But there could really be benefit to the people who are already on board laughing together.
And I think actually it could be pretty effective, like what we were just talking about, trying to cover a slow motion disaster like a fast crisis, where we talk about these killer missiles that are attacking thousands of kids. If you do a video series on a bunch of different real crises and do it in the style of CNN, I think that could be very funny, and that would get the message across, not just to the people who already believe it, but be oh yeah, that's true. Why are we focusing on a car crash when there are thousands dying?
There was actually maybe a good example of what you're talking about comes from Monty Python. There was this running thing they did in and now for something completely different, or what was it called? Monty Python's Flying Circus. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was the Parrot News Network, where they presented world news, an ocean liner crashed, or there was a hurricane, and then they would always say, no parrots were injured. and I don't know how many people made this connection, but for me the connection was in the U.S. when we cover news in the world, the main emphasis is always but we're Americans.
Yeah.
Or, how did this impact us as Americans? And it looks silly when it's parrots, but yeah.
Okay, so changing tack a little bit. So Joe, you mentioned, one solution is maybe you do all EA research, you come to certain conclusions, and then you just storify them. And I've heard, at least from people I respect, that, but I don't know this is true, but at least they've said it to be true, that Deep Impact and Armageddon had a really big impact on US policy with respect to near-Earth asteroids, where they dramatically increased the amount of spending monitoring near-Earth asteroids. So, these two asteroid movies seem to have great impact in terms of existential risk mitigation. And other people, you've told me a bit about participant media, which, for example, did the film Contagion. That was a socially motivated film to try and get people worrying a bit more about mass pandemics. Do you think we could do more of this? Do you think it's potentially impactful? How would we know? Could we do the same for AI?
I mean, I'd be really curious to know how true that really is, if those two Hollywood movies really had that influence. And I would love to hear that they did, because that would make me feel much more important for doing the work that I do. You mentioned participant media. So they're a company that their whole mandate is that they make movies that are supposed to have a positive social impact. However, and they've done movies that are very commercially successful, but they're also backed by someone who made his money. Jeff Skoll, who made a lot of money because he was I think the first president of eBay, and he makes participant media happen. Now some of their movies do well, but I don't know that in a purely market-driven production company that you'd be able to do movies like that. But maybe combined with the sorts of philanthropic efforts that you're talking about, you could. And I would also just tend to think that stories can maybe have more impact when they're positive rather than negative. Warnings, I find often, a warning in a movie or something might have the effect of trivializing the thing you're warning about just as much as really getting people concerned. Whereas showing just something positive, for example, a simple, very middle of the road mainstream sitcom like Will and Grace, which was the first sitcom to have a main character who was gay. I think that probably did have an impact on marriage equality laws coming into effect some 10 years later. I don't know how you would measure that.
So apparently the film Babe resulted in a very significant drop in demand for bacon.
Really?
So that's interesting. Yeah. See? Nice things. Sitcoms. Pigs.
And Nemo, my kids told me Nemo resulted in people buying a lot of clownfish. I don't know if that's good. But I think I love Joe's point about the positive, because I do find you can definitely guilt people. That's pretty easy. If you do a thought experiment that you're basically murdering people by having a Frappuccino every morning instead of giving it to charity. And I do believe that's true in a sense, but
that's the EA message we want in the media.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a little off-putting. So I prefer your imagery in your book where you said, everyone can be a hero, everyone can be Oscar Schindler, everyone can rush into a burning house just by contributing to the right. So that I find more appealing, at least to me. I don't know what the evidence shows.
So I think, the world of Hollywood is something that probably, I certainly know basically nothing about, and I think that'll be true for many kind of in this audience. What's the kind of potential, we often think about, what communities are potentially receptive to these kind of ideas. Do you think, do you think that we should be trying to do outreach among the kind of people in Hollywood, trying to get people, you said there's a lot of good intentions, should we try and, steer them in a more yay direction if we can? Or?
I would actually say yes, and I know I sort of started out by sounding pessimistic, but I do think that, and especially now, frankly, since the new president, there's probably more appetite in Hollywood for not just for activism, but there is that, but also for particularly, more thoughtful, more rational thinking activism, more rationally thoughtful activism. I think that there probably would be receptivity there.
Okay, great news. And so, yeah, what would you think then about, again, a couple of people have been asking in the audience, like there's lots of different facets to kind of EA. What, if we are going into kind of more mass media and trying to convey this message, what are the 2 or 3 things that we should be trying to distill EA down to? Because certainly in my experience with dealing with the media, they just want to simplify everything, preferably make it more controversial as well. What's the small number of messages that you think are kind of most core to the message?
Well, I mean, I was thinking on the way over about the different parts of EA, and I broke it down into 3, and that was to give to the right cause, like AI or global poverty, to give to the right charity within that cause that's most effective, and also to give more money in general, just up the percentage you give. And I actually think the give more is really the easiest, because the others you have to think about for a little. But like the fact that everyone should give more money is that's pretty basic. Pretty. So I don't know. Those to me are the 3 keys to get across.
Mm-hmm.
Here's something I've been thinking about recently in terms of EA messaging. So the original model, or like a sort of default model of communication about EA is you should be giving more money to important EA causes. And then I think people advocates noticed that there was often a lot of pushback where people felt like, oh, you're telling me I can't have my latte in the morning, or I'm a murderer. And they started modifying the message into this like 2-bucket model, where like, look, in this bucket you're spending money on, yourself, on luxuries. You can have your latte, you can take vacations. But then like when you do give to charity, that's the other bucket. And EA, like, our thesis is that there's like much better ways to give to charity than a lot of people are currently doing. I think that the right model is actually a 3-bucket model, which is maybe going against your simplify everything message. But so it seems to me now that what we want to say is like, okay, yeah, you have your first bucket, that's like stuff you do for yourself, that's fine. Your second bucket is charitable giving, or sort of giving that you're doing altruistically for stuff that you just personally care about. Like, your local community center, your like local arts organization, maybe the college you went to if you care about that, or an animal shelter, and that's fine. That's like you giving to stuff that matters to you. And then the third bucket is helping the world. And that third bucket is what EA is really about. The third bucket is where EA can create a dramatic improvement in the effectiveness of people's giving, both by helping them pick effective charities over non-effective charities, but also think about which causes are going to have the greatest impact, which causes are important and neglected and tractable, etc. And I think my current intuition, I could be wrong about this, is that separating those second and third buckets reduces that like reflexive reaction that people have, where they have to defend why giving to their college is actually the most effective thing for the world. And they sort of tie themselves in knots because they feel like their own giving is being challenged. I don't know, maybe Will disagrees with me, but my guess is that separating those buckets makes the message, it reduces the barriers to the message in the public.
I mean, that's certainly how I convey things when I talk to families and stuff. Yeah, I actually have more buckets than you.
Oh, great.
I
was feeling guilty for having 3, but...
well, there's different, even within this, let's not go into it too much, but even within the second bucket, there's different reasons. Like, one is reciprocity, like to your alma mater. Another is like, part of your identity. Maybe you give to an LGBT rights group, because it's like, just kind of defining kind of who you are. Third is like, well, I have a personal connection. So even within that, like, giving for things you like, there's like various buckets as well. And yeah, you can often, buy those things relatively cheaply. So like 5% of your spending can go on that, and 95% on helping the world. But that is hard. Once you've got like 6 buckets, that's hard to convey in a tweet. Joe, did you have anything to say there? Or,
well, sure. I guess I would focus, and maybe just for the sake of variety, focus less on giving money. Because I think generally, especially if we're talking about communicating via the media and some stranger who doesn't know anything about EA, just hearing about it, if you start out by, this is going to be about how you should give money to something, I think you're probably going to just turn a lot of people off right away.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find the most appealing, and I wonder if there's a way to like distill it down, is just thinking rationally. And I think there is, again, I was sort of touching on this a second ago, there is a real appetite nowadays for that in light of what's going on in Washington, in light of, I think a lot of people are sort of sick of the kind of meme culture and sort of the echo chamber effect. People talk about that a lot. And maybe if you could sort of just present, the antidote to all that stuff is rational thinking. It's not, and that's sort of a soundbite version of it. But, rather than just adhering to, one side or the other, how do you know what news is fake news, et cetera? There actually is a way to parse some of this stuff. And it started in the scientific revolution 500 years ago, and it's the pinnacle of humanity. And like, this is what EA is about, is thinking rationally about, what you're going to do with your life and your job, or what you're going to do with your money, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're really here to promote is let's think,
Yeah, I really hope we were recording that.
Hearing my innermost thoughts come out of Joe Gordon-Levitt's mouth. Very surreal.
I just took that from one of your YouTube videos, pretty much.
And when I was writing my article on effective altruism, I tried and struggled with how to get across in like an elevator pitch what it is. And I don't know if I hit on the right metaphors, but one that resonated with some people was Moneyball for saving the world, like
that's a great
sabermetrics.
one, man. That's great.
And another one was like if Mother Teresa and Spock had a baby, that would be effective altruism. Although I know some people think...
Well, Julia's going to object. She has a whole talk on the straw Vulcan.
And Mother Teresa.
Teresa.
Yeah, I
And
know.
on Mother Teresa, so it's like our two least favorite people.
I know.
Problematic all the way down.
It sure is.
Moneyball's a really good example, though. I hadn't thought of that, but that's exactly what that movie is about.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, but that's a really great movie for that.
Okay, so I think final question then, again, coming from the audience, is just what, single or couple of bits of the kind of most actionable advice would you have, both for individuals in the room who are, engaging in the media or trying to spread these messages, whether general EA or specific cause areas, and second, for the sorts of organizations like the Center for Effective Altruism and GiveWell Open Philanthropy. If you could give them one piece of advice, what would that be? And we can go, AJ, you can start.
I can start? I guess one thing I find effective, again, is not stressing the negative and the guilt, but stressing the positive and also the idea that everyone, the media is very splintered, of course, but there are some things that go across the aisle, like self-help, for instance. Everyone wants to feel good. So stressing the idea that you can get that warm glow. There's all this science about how giving and helping the world makes you feel better. So maybe trying to focus on that, focus on how this can help you, the reader, as opposed to just helping the world.
Cool.
Well, I talked earlier about this failure mode of wanting to jump right to the really intellectually interesting to you topics. And that's a mistake I personally have made many, many times. Another mistake that I've made many times that I suspect other EAs have or will make is, so I would write these blog posts or give these interviews, and I would think to myself, oh, I don't want people to misunderstand me and think I'm saying X. So let me add a line in there that's like, just to be clear, I'm not saying X. And then the comment section was full of people saying, how can you say X? And I was like, but I... And, you know, the lesson is just, kind of to Joe's point earlier, you have to say something again and again, and you have to say it loudly and in a way that's sort of salient to people, that sticks. And, you know, I think you also have to kind of not just claim that you're, you know, not saying X, but sort of act and speak in a way that someone who didn't believe X would act and speak in. That's kind of an abstract thing, but...
I am not a crook is the classic example. When Richard Nixon said, I am not a crook, everyone thought he was a crook.
Yeah.
Or saying,
so like,
I am the most humble man in the world.
well, so, I mean, I was thinking of things where it's like a reasonable, okay, I'll just give an example. If you're like criticizing a government program, an intervention that was, you know, ineffective, for example, a lot of people are going to read that and kind of assume like, oh, they're a libertarian, they just like think government should be small, and maybe that's not what you think, and not the impression you want to leave people with. But because like people who tend to criticize government programs also statistically tend to, you know, dislike big government, then they're going to draw that assumption. So you kind of have to, A, try to predict what assumptions or inferences people will make about you and your values based on what you literally said, and then sort of go farther than you think you need to go to erase that assumption. Because like, you know, people reading my blog post, they're not reading it that closely. They may not even see or parse that line that I put in there to try to protect myself. And they also have these priors that you really have to overcome, strong priors about what someone like you believes. And I think this is something that EA struggles with, that we kind of, in some ways, we kind of pattern match to like the current villain in the media, which is like the like neo-libertarian tech bro who wants to like remake the world in his own image and isn't going to bother with like traditional institutions like democracy. And this like I see crazy like absurd critiques of people fitting that who have been fit into or who themselves fit that stereotype. Like there was an article criticizing Mark Zuckerberg for spending money on cancer research. And the journalist was like, this is terrible, because if you save old people, then the world will be overpopulated. And I was like, okay, first of all, that's kind of a horrid thing to say, but also, where were you all these years when NIH and NSF were funding cancer research? Like, it's only now that a tech bro is funding cancer research that it's a bad thing. And I see the same thing with EA, where, you know, because we're analytical, a lot of us are like software engineers or in finance, we tend to sort of have a similar, like, with cleverness, we can do better than the existing wisdom or the existing institutions, and that's shared by this, like, tech bro archetype. Anyway, so there's some pattern matching happening there, and I think you have to kind of go out of your way to overcome that prior.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, I guess one piece of advice that just always think about if you're going to communicate via, especially mass media of any kind, is know your audience, know who you're speaking to. And especially, I think, in the case of EA, there's maybe two categories to think about. There's the folks who are already into thinking rationally and kind of into the kind of mindset that you talk about, the scientific mindset that you mentioned in your opening talk. And if that's who you're talking to, great. Then you can use, you know, that kind of rational argument. But if you're not talking to someone like that, if you're talking to probably what would be a larger audience, I think probably have to accept that that kind of rational argument isn't going to work, and you have to tell stories. You have to tell emotionally based, you know, human interest stories. And those aren't necessarily bad. I happen to love those. I spend my life telling them. But, and I think there's probably ways that you can tell stories that are pertinent to what EA is about. But you have to, like, you have to do it that way, or else no one will, those folks won't listen.
Oh. Okay, well, yeah, let us all thank our panelists here. This was really fun and interesting talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.